Hi there. Welcome to NapTime History channel. Tonight we're about to embark on a journey that'll make your most awkward gym locker room experience seem like a peaceful meditation retreat. Picture this. You're standing at the entrance of a massive Roman bathhouse, the air thick with steam and the unmistakable scent of olive oil mixed with human sweat. And through the hazy mist, you spot your city's most respected magistrate casually discussing grain imports while completely, utterly, gloriously naked. Let's be honest here. You probably won't survive this with your dignity intact, but we're going to try anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. All right, let's begin the story. You push through the heavy wooden doors of the bathhouse, and immediately the heat slaps you like an overly enthusiastic bath attendant. The caldarium stretches before you, a cavernous space filled with more naked bodies than a Renaissance painting, except these aren't idealized marble figures. These are real Romans in all their hairy, sweaty, unfiltered glory. Senator Quintus is there, gesturing wildly about tax reform, and you can't help but notice he gestures with everything. The mainstream historical fact nobody mentions in your classical education is that Romans spent an average of 2 to 3 hours here daily, conducting more business in the buff than most modern executives do in boardrooms. Your eyes dart frantically, searching for somewhere safe to look, but everywhere you turn, there's another philosophical debate happening between men who've clearly never heard of modesty. The ceiling offers brief respite, magnificent frescoes depicting Neptune and various water nymphs who, ironically, seem to be wearing more than anyone actually present in the room. You shuffle forward, trying to look casual while internally screaming, and nearly collide with Marcus the baker, who's explaining his new bread recipe to anyone who'll listen. The quirky historical tidbit that makes this even more surreal. Romans believed being naked together promoted social equality. Hard to be pompous when everyone can see your farmer's tan and questionable grooming choices. The heat intensifies as you venture deeper, and you realize with growing horror that you're overdressed for this particular social gathering. Around you, conversations flow as freely as the sweat dripping down everyone's backs. Two merchants debate olive oil prices while lounging on marble benches, their business acumen apparently unaffected by their state of undress. A group of young patricians plays a ball game in the corner, and you desperately try not to notice how, enthusiastically, they're jumping. Historians still argue whether the Roman acceptance of communal nudity was a sign of body-positive enlightenment or just another way to show off social status through well-oiled abs and expensive body slaves. You spot an empty spot on a bench and make a beeline for it, only to discover it's directly in the splash zone of a particularly vigorous conversation about aqueduct engineering. The engineer, a portly man with an unfortunate birthmark shaped like gall, demonstrates water flow principles using hand gestures that make you long for PowerPoint presentations. His assistant nods along, seemingly unbothered by the fact that his boss's animated explanations are causing certain parts to helicopter with concerning velocity. This is your life now, dodging airborne appendages while pretending to care about hydraulic pressure. Steam rises from the heated pools, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere where naked bodies appear and disappear like fleshy phantoms. You recognize your neighbor Lucius emerging from the mist, and before you can escape, he's spotted you and is wadding over with the determination of a man who wants to discuss property boundaries. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and definitely nowhere to look that won't result in permanent psychological scarring. He corners you near a dolphin-shaped fountain, blissfully unaware that his enthusiastic greeting is making things infinitely worse. The sounds of the bathhouse create a symphony of social torture, splashing water, echoing conversations, the slap of flesh on marble as people transition between pools, and the occasional yelp as someone discovers that marble benches in the caldarium are basically cooking surfaces for human buttocks. You're sweating now, and not just from the heat. The realization hits that you'll eventually have to disrobe and join this carnival of exposed humanity, and your fight or flight response is screaming for flight, but the social expectation weighs heavier than a gladiator's armor. As you stand there, paralyzed by the sheer volume of nudity surrounding you, a bath attendant approaches with a knowing smile. He's seen your type before, the reluctant bather, the modesty clinger, the one who thinks a sublegaculum should stay on at all times. He gestures toward the apoditerium, the changing room, with the patient air of someone who's guided countless embarrassed citizens through this daily ritual. You know resistance is futile. Roman social life revolves around these bathhouses, like planets around the sun, and avoiding them would be like trying to conduct business while refusing to speak Latin. The sheer democracy of nudity becomes apparent as you notice a slave discussing philosophy with a senator, their social stations temporarily equalized by their mutual nakedness. It's oddly beautiful in a deeply uncomfortable way. The senator actually seems to be listening, nodding thoughtfully as the slave makes a point about Stoic philosophy while casually scratching himself. This is Rome at its most egalitarian, where the only thing separating a patrician from a plebeian is the quality of their towel, if they remembered to bring one. Your survival instincts kick in as you mentally map the quickest route to the changing room, calculating angles to minimize exposure to chatty neighbors and overly friendly acquaintances. But as you turn to make your escape, you catch sight of something that stops you cold, the tax collector you've been avoiding for weeks, heading straight for you with the determined stride of a man who knows you can't run away when you're naked. This is how they get you. You realize with dawning horror, the bathhouse isn't just about hygiene, it's a social trap designed to corner the unwilling into conversations they've been dodging for months. The apoditerium looms before you like the entrance to Hades, except instead of Cerberus guarding the gates, there's a wrinkled attendant with judgmental eyes and grabby hands. You've managed to escape the tax collector by pretending to have sudden stomach troubles, a classic Roman excuse that nobody questions because everyone's had the garum sweats at least once. Now you face a new challenge, the changing room, where social hierarchies determine in everything from locker placement to how many times someone accidentally kicks your sandals across the floor. The room reeks of anxiety and old leather, with wooden compartments lining the walls like tiny prisons for your dignity. You quickly learn that locker assignment isn't random. Oh no, that would be too simple for Roman society. The best spots near the door go to magistrates and wealthy merchants, while plebeians get shoved into dark corners where the roof leaks and mysterious fungi grow. You're somewhere in the middle, socially speaking, which means you get a cubby that's only slightly damp and probably hasn't housed a family of rats recently. Probably. Around you, the undressing begins with all the grace of a theatrical tragedy. Togas unfurl like surrendering flags, revealing the pale, hairy truth beneath Roman fashion. You notice everyone has their own disrobing rhythm. The confident ones strip with the efficiency of seasoned soldiers, while the nervous fumble with clasps and pins like they're diffusing Greek fire. One particularly rotund merchant gets tangled in his own toga and has to be freed by two slaves, emerging red-faced and already sweating before he's even hit the pools. The theft situation in the Apoditerium is legendarily bad, which is the quirky historical detail tour guides skip. Romans employed specialized thieves called furores balnearii, who made their living exclusively from stealing clothes at bathhouses. You eye your neighbors suspiciously as you fold your tunic, wondering which one might be eyeing your relatively new belt. The man next to you solves this problem by wearing clothes so threadbare that even the most desperate thief would take pity. Smart, if depressing. You're handed a small wooden token by the attendant, your claim ticket for retrieving your belongings later, assuming they haven't walked off to start a new life without you. The token has a crude drawing of a rooster on it, which seems fitting given how exposed you're about to feel. Others get dolphins, gladiators, or geometric patterns, and you can't help but notice the wealthy citizens receive ivory tokens with intricate carvings, while yours looks like someone whittled it with their teeth during a particularly boring Senate meeting. The social politics of undressing become apparent as you observe the unspoken rules. Never undress faster than someone of higher status. It implies you're eager to leave their presence. Never undress slower. That suggests you think you're too important to hurry. The whole thing is a delicate dance of fabric and timing that would make a choreographer weep. You try to match pace with a middle-ranking merchant nearby, creating an awkward, synchronized stripping that neither of you acknowledges. Storage strategy is crucial for survival. Veterans of the Bathhouse Wars know to bring a slave specifically for guarding clothes, but you're not that fancy. Instead, you employ the common man's method, wadding everything into a ball so tight that unraveling it would take a determined thief at least 30 seconds, enough time for you to hear the commotion from the pools and come running, naked and furious. You've heard stories of men chasing thieves through the streets, wearing nothing but righteous anger and olive oil. The capsarius, the cloakroom attendant, watches your paranoid preparations with amusement. For a small fee, he'll guard your belongings personally, though guard is a flexible term that might mean negotiates a split with the thieves. You decide to risk it and flip him a copper coin, hoping his greed for future tips outweighs whatever the local theft guild is offering. He pockets your coin with a grin that suggests your tunic's life expectancy just improved from definitely doomed to probably survives. Historians still debate whether the Romans' casual attitude toward bathhouse theft was a sign of philosophical acceptance of life's uncertainties or just terrible security infrastructure. Either way, you notice wealthier patrons have brought decoy clothes, worn out tunics they don't mind losing, while their good clothes stay home. One clever patrician has even sewn fake jewelry onto his decoy toga, ensuring thieves waste time stealing worthless glass while he soaks in peace. The hierarchy extends to changing space itself. Senators get actual privacy screens, though privacy is relative when the screens only cover you from neck to knee. Mid-level citizens change in semi-open alcoves where you can maintain the illusion of modesty if you face the wall and ignore the mirrors. You're in the free-for-all zone, where personal space is a philosophical concept rather than physical reality. A sweaty gladiator trainer squeezes past, leaving an oily streak on your arm that makes you question every life choice that led to this moment. You notice some bathers have brought their own security, personal slaves whose sole job is to stare menacingly at anyone who looks too interested in their master's belongings. One particularly paranoid merchant has 3 guards for one toga, creating a human fortress around his cubby. The guards look bored out of their minds, probably contemplating whether watching a toga for 3 hours is better or worse than their usual duties. At least here, they get to see some entertainment when fights break out over stolen sandals. The undressing room has its own ecosystem of regulars. There's the compulsive clothes folder who spends 20 minutes creating perfect geometric squares of fabric, the nervous newcomer who keeps checking his token like it might spontaneously combust, the veteran who strips with such practiced efficiency he's naked before you can say Jupiter's lightning. And inevitably, there's always one guy who brought way too many accessories and spends forever removing rings, chains, and mysterious amulets that probably don't even ward off anything useful. Now comes the moment of truth, the oil and strigil station, where Romans transform themselves into human salad preparations before scraping it all off with a curved metal tool that looks like it was designed by someone who really hated skin. You stand there, naked as the day you were born, but considerably less cute, clutching your oil flask like it's the last shred of your dignity. Around you, the scraping symphony has begun, a chorus of metal on flesh that sounds like someone's sharpening 100 tiny swords on leather strops. The oil application process is where things get intensely personal, intensely fast. If you're wealthy, you've brought a slave specifically trained in the art of oil massage, someone who knows exactly how much pressure to apply without making it weird. If you're middle class like you're stuck with self-application or the horrifying prospect of asking a stranger for help with those hard-to-reach places. You watch in horror as 2 merchants cheerfully oil each other's backs, chatting about grain prices while performing what looks like an aggressive butter-churning motion on each other's shoulder blades. The mainstream historical fact everyone glosses over is that Romans didn't use soap. They believed oil pulled dirt from the pores, which then got scraped away with the strigil. It's basically the ancient equivalent of seasoning yourself before the scraping begins. You pour the olive oil into your palm, trying not to think about how this is the same stuff you drizzled on your bread this morning. The expensive crowd uses scented oils imported from Syria, while plebeians make do with whatever rancid olive squeezings they can afford. Your oil sits somewhere in the middle, not quite salad dressing, not quite parfum. Application technique matters more than you'd think. Too little oil, and the strigil will feel like someone's trying to peel you like a stubborn carrot. Too much, and you'll slip around the bathhouse like a greased piglet at a country fair. You start with conservative dabs, but the oil veterans around you are slathering themselves with the enthusiasm of someone basting a roast chicken. One particularly hairy gentleman nearby has used so much oil his chest hair has achieved a level of shine usually reserved for polished bronze statues. The strigil itself is a marvel of Roman engineering designed to make you question human ingenuity. Curved like a miniature sickle, it's supposed to glide smoothly along your skin, collecting oil and dirt in its groove. In practice, it's more like trying to shave with a spoon while blindfolded and drunk. You give it an experimental scrape along your arm and immediately understand why wealthy Romans pay professionals for this. It requires the flexibility of a contortionist and the pain tolerance of a gladiator. Your first attempt at self-strigilization goes about as well as expected. The angle is wrong, the pressure too light, and you succeed only in redistributing the oil into interesting patterns that make you look like a poorly glazed amphora. The man next to you, clearly taking pity, offers to show you the proper technique. Before you can politely decline, he's demonstrating on his own leg with the focus of a master craftsman, explaining the optimal 45-degree angle and the importance of the flicking motion at the end of each stroke. His enthusiasm for strigil technique borders on the religious. The quirky historical detail that makes this whole process even more bizarre. Romans collected the scraped off oil and sweat mixture from famous gladiators and athletes to sell as medicine. You're essentially producing the ancient equivalent of bath water, except greasier and significantly less appealing. Somewhere in this very bathhouse, there's probably an entrepreneurial slave collecting the scrapings from successful merchants, hoping to market it as essence of business success or something equally ridiculous. Eye contact becomes your greatest enemy during the strigilization process. There's something uniquely vulnerable about scraping oil off your body while trying to maintain casual conversation. You lock eyes with the senator mid-scrape, and both of you freeze, trapped in a moment of mutual acknowledgement that this is deeply weird but socially necessary. He breaks first, returning to his vigorous self-scraping with renewed determination to pretend that moment never happened. You follow suit, attacking your shins with the strigil like they've personally offended Jupiter. Historians still argue about whether the communal strigiling was a bonding experience or just mutually assured embarrassment. The evidence points to both. Nothing builds camaraderie quite like shared suffering, and nothing suffers quite like your dignity when you're trying to reach that spot between your shoulder blades while a dozen strangers offer helpful suggestions. One particularly flexible young athlete demonstrates a technique that involves putting one foot on a bench and contorting like he's auditioning for a circus act. You attempt to replicate it and nearly dislocate something important. The professionals make it look easy. Of course, bath attendants glide through the crowd, offering their services for a fee, their strigils flashing like tiny scythes as they harvest oil and dirt from willing customers. They work with the efficiency of someone who's scraped 1,000 bodies and become immune to the awkwardness. One attendant works on a particularly corpulent merchant, navigating the rolls and folds like a skilled cartographer mapping new territories. The merchant looks blissful, eyes closed, apparently finding zen in being scraped like a piece of furniture being refinished. You're getting the hang of it now, finding a rhythm in the scrape flick wipe pattern. The oil collects in the strigil's curve, a disgusting cocktail of your body's various secretions that you flick into the designated drainage channels with perhaps too much enthusiasm. A glob lands on someone's foot, and you mumble an apology while pretending to be intensely focused on scraping your kneecap. They grunt acknowledgement. In the strigil zone, all accidents are forgiven because everyone's too busy creating their own disasters. The social hierarchy even extends to strigil quality. The wealthy sport bronze or silver strigils with decorated handles, some inscribed with motivational phrases like health through scraping or cleanliness is next to godliness in Latin. Your iron strigil looks like it's seen better decades, possibly centuries. There's a suspicious notch in the blade that makes every stroke an adventure in not accidentally filleting yourself. You've seen prettier farming implements, but it gets the job done with all the elegance of a dull butter knife. The tepidarium beckons like a lukewarm purgatory, promising neither the shocking cold of the frigidarium nor the overwhelming heat of the caldarium, just a mediocre middle ground where social situations stretch on forever like a Senate filibuster. You shuffle in, clutching the world's most inadequate towel, a scrap of linen so small it couldn't cover a modest statue's private parts, let alone your entire situation. The room temperature hits you with all the impact of a disappointed sigh, and you realize this is where Romans come to have those conversations that are too important for the hot room, but not urgent enough for the cold plunge. Around you, the tepidarium social dance has already begun. Groups cluster on marble benches, their conversations echoing off the vaulted ceiling in a cacophony of opinions about everything from gladiator rankings to the proper way to prepare garum. You spot an empty corner and make for it, but Roman bathhouse rules are clear. Solitude is suspicious before you can settle into peaceful invisibility. Marcus the wool merchant has spotted you and waves you over with the enthusiasm of someone who's been waiting all day to share his opinions about the recent games. "Did you see Titus Maximus fight yesterday?" he asks, apparently unbothered by the fact that you're both essentially naked and discussing blood sports. You hadn't seen the fight, but that doesn't matter because Marcus is already launching into a blow-by-blow recreation, complete with hand gestures that make his towel situation even more precarious. The mainstream historical fact that nobody mentions is that most gladiator fights weren't to the death, too expensive to keep training new fighters. But try explaining that to Marcus, who's convinced every match should end with someone meeting their ancestors. You nod along, strategically positioning your inadequate towel while trying to look interested in Marcus's theory about why retiarii are superior to murmelones. The lukewarm water laps at your ankles as more bathers enter, each bringing their own conversational agenda. A group of young patricians debates philosophy nearby, throwing around names like Seneca and Cicero while seemingly unaware that their philosophical gravitas is somewhat undermined by the fact that one of them keeps slipping on the wet floor. The tepidarium's design is supposedly based on Greek ideals of moderation, but there's nothing moderate about the social pressure. You're expected to contribute to conversations, but not too much. That's showing off. You should laugh at jokes, but not too loudly. That's unseemly. You need to maintain eye contact to show engagement, but not too much. That's aggressive. It's like navigating a social minefield while balancing on wet marble and pretending your towel isn't slowly plotting its escape. The quirky historical tidbit that makes this even more absurd? Romans believed the tepidarium's moderate temperature was ideal for discussing business deals because extreme temperatures made people too emotional for negotiations. So here you are, watching two merchants haggle over olive oil prices while sitting in a pool of tepid water. Their negotiation tactics hampered by the constant need to readjust their towel coverage. One merchant tries to emphasize a point by standing up dramatically, forgetting his towel situation entirely, and hastily sits back down while his business partner pretends not to notice. A senator holds court near the warmest corner, surrounded by clients and hangers-on who laugh at his jokes with the desperation of people whose livelihoods depend on finding him amusing. He's telling a story about meeting a barbarian chieftain, and every time he gets to the good part, he pauses for dramatic effect, forcing his audience to lean in closer despite the awkwardness of the seating arrangement. You're close enough to hear but far enough to avoid being drawn into the performance, a sweet spot you guard jealously. The towel situation reaches crisis levels when you attempt to shift position. Roman towels are designed by someone who clearly hated both coverage and functionality. They're too small to wrap around anything substantial, too thin to provide actual modesty, and too prone to slipping at crucial moments. You've developed a complex hand-holding system that requires constant vigilance and prevents you from gesticulating during conversations, which in Roman society is like trying to speak with your mouth taped shut. Historians still debate whether the Romans' casual attitude toward modesty was philosophical or just practical resignation. After the fifth near miss with your towel, you start to understand it's probably the latter. Everyone's in the same barely covered boat, so eventually you just accept that occasional glimpses of your neighbor's everything is part of the bathhouse experience, like uncomfortable temperatures and questionable hygiene practices. The conversation topics in the tepidarium follow a predictable pattern: sports, politics, business, gossip about who's sleeping with whose wife, more sports, complaints about taxes, and then back to sports. You find yourself trapped between two groups, one dissecting last week's chariot races with the intensity of military strategists, the other gossiping about a scandal involving a Vestal virgin and a suspicious number of visits to her cousin's house. You try to look interested in both without actually committing to either conversation, a social gymnastics routine that requires more flexibility than your strigil work. The water in the tepidarium has that special quality of being just wrong enough to be annoying, but not wrong enough to justify leaving. It's like the bath attendants calculated the exact temperature that would keep you mildly uncomfortable, but socially obligated to remain. You notice regulars have developed coping strategies. Some bring inflated pig bladders to use as cushions. Others have mastered the art of looking engaged while mentally planning their escape to the hot room. A dice game breaks out in the corner, despite gambling being technically illegal in the baths. The players use a complicated system of hand signals to indicate bets, turning the whole thing into an interpretive dance of greed and probability. One player gets too excited about his throw and stands up to celebrate, giving everyone an unwanted anatomy lesson before his friends pull him back down. The game continues as if nothing happened, though you notice everyone's now sitting a bit further apart. Your survival strategy crystallizes as you observe the veterans. Keep moving. Stationary targets attract conversationalists. Develop a repertoire of non-committal responses. Interesting. You don't say. And imagine that. Cover most situations. Master the art of the strategic bathroom break, the only socially acceptable escape route from boring conversations. And most importantly, always know where your towel is, because losing track of it in the tepidarium is like losing your shield in battle, technically survivable, but deeply unfortunate. The caldarium awaits like the mouth of Vulcan's forge, belching steam that makes the tepidarium seem like a refreshing spring breeze. You abandon your pathetic towel at the entrance. It would only turn into a sad, steaming rag anyway, and step into what can only be described as Jupiter's own sauna after he's had a particularly stressful day dealing with mortal stupidity. The heat hits you like a physical presence, an aggressive embrace from an overly affectionate fire demon who doesn't understand personal boundaries. Through the thick steam, ghostly figures materialize and disappear like sweaty phantoms. You can barely see 3 feet ahead, which is both a blessing and a curse. Blessing because you don't have to make eye contact with anyone's anything. Curse because you're navigating by sound and smell alone. And what sounds they are! The wheeze of overheated merchants, the splash of someone finding a pool by falling into it, and the constant drip, drip, drip of condensation that makes everything sound like a water torture chamber designed by particularly creative Greeks. You shuffle forward, arms outstretched like a blind oracle, trying to find a bench that isn't already occupied by someone's sweating backside. Your foot finds a pool edge by nearly sliding into it, and you catch yourself just before taking an ungraceful plunge. Someone chuckles in the mist. There's always a veteran who's memorized the layout and enjoys watching newcomers stumble around like wine-drunk satyrs. You finally locate a bench by the sophisticated method of backing into it. The marble so hot it brands your buttocks like your livestock at a market. The mainstream historical fact that everyone conveniently forgets is that Romans conducted serious business negotiations in these steam-filled hellscapes. Through the fog, you can hear 2 merchants discussing grain shipments. their voices distorted by the acoustics and the fact that they're slowly being poached like eggs. One keeps pausing to wheeze dramatically, using his obvious discomfort as a negotiation tactic. I'm literally dying in here, so give me a better price. It's either brilliant or just the heat talking. Visibility drops to near zero as more bodies pile in, each one adding their own personal humidity to the atmosphere. You're sitting next to someone. You can feel their presence like a radiating heat source, but you couldn't identify them if your life depended on it. They could be your worst enemy or your best friend, and you'd never know. They shift, and suddenly you're aware of every point where your bodies aren't quite touching but are definitely too close for comfort. The unspoken rule of the Caldarium: pretend everyone has a 3-foot invisible barrier around them, even when you're practically sitting in their lap. The quirky historical detail that makes this torture chamber even more special: wealthy Romans would pay attendants to fan the steam around, creating artificial air currents that did absolutely nothing for the temperature, but made everyone feel like they were trapped in a convection oven. You experience this firsthand when a slave with a large palm frond starts waving it enthusiastically, succeeding only in moving the hot air around like he's stirring soup. The soup is you. You are slowly dissolving into human broth. Business continues despite the fact that everyone's brain is slowly cooking. A senator you vaguely recognize from the forum is holding court, or at least you think it's him. Could be any sweating blob with opinions about tax reform. He's explaining his new proposal for aqueduct funding, punctuating each point by slapping his thigh wetly. The sound echoes in the chamber like someone's tenderizing meat, which isn't far from what's actually happening. His audience nods along, though whether from agreement or heat exhaustion is anyone's guess. You attempt to breathe normally, but the air is so thick with moisture, it's like trying to inhale soup. Every breath comes with a side of other people's essence, their sweat, their oil residue, their life choices. The Romans believed sweating purged bad humors from the body, but all you're purging is your will to live, and possibly your breakfast. A particularly large drop of condensation, or someone's sweat, you prefer not to speculate, lands on your head with an audible plop. This is your life now, a human teabag steeping in communal perspiration. Historians still argue about whether the extreme heat was intentional torture or therapeutic treatment. Having experienced it firsthand, you're leaning toward the former. The man next to you has achieved a shade of red usually reserved for boiled lobsters, yet he seems perfectly content, eyes closed in what might be meditation or the early stages of heat stroke. He occasionally mutters what sound like prayers to Mercury, probably asking for swift deliverance or at least better ventilation. The Caldarium has its own social hierarchy based on heat tolerance. The iron-willed veterans occupy the hottest spots near the furnace outlets, where the temperature could forge metal. Middle-tier bathers like yourself huddle in the moderate zones, if any area in this inferno can be called moderate. Newcomers and the weak cling to spots near the door, ready to bolt at the first sign of real distress. You've already seen 2 people stumble out, looking like they've seen the shores of the river Styx and decided they weren't ready for the crossing. A commotion in the corner suggests Someone's either having a religious experience or passing out. In the caldarium, these often look identical. Friends fan the victim with their hands, which is like trying to cool someone down by blowing hot breath on them. Eventually, they half carry, half drag the person out, leaving a trail of water and dignity in their wake. This is considered normal. You make a mental note of where the exit is, just in case you need to make a similar ungraceful departure. Through the steam, business transactions continue with surreal determination. Someone's buying a slave, haggling over the price while both parties slowly melt. Another group debates the merits of different gladiator schools, their passionate arguments punctuated by the need to pause and gasp for air. You overhear someone trying to arrange a marriage for their daughter, describing her virtues while sweat cascades down their face like a waterfall. The Caldarium, where Rome's future is decided by men who can barely think straight from heat exhaustion. The heat reaches a point where you start to understand why Romans believed in so many gods. Clearly, you need multiple deities to blame for this experience. Your sweat has sweat. Your hair feels like seaweed plastered to your skull. Parts of you that you didn't know could sweat have joined the party. Yet leaving now would show weakness, and in Roman society, that's worse than death by steam inhalation. So you sit, you sweat, and you pretend this is perfectly normal. Just another day in the empire's most socially acceptable torture chamber. The moment of truth arrives as you stagger from the caldarium toward the frigidarium, your body so overheated you're practically steaming like a fresh-baked bread. The cold plunge pool awaits like a liquid slap from Neptune himself, its surface deceptively calm, hiding the personality-altering shock that lurks beneath. Veterans dive in without hesitation, but you've seen their faces during that first moment of contact, the brief flash of regret, the silent scream, the full-body convulsion that suggests maybe the barbarians have the right idea, avoiding Roman civilization altogether. You approach the pool edge with all the enthusiasm of a condemned criminal approaching the execution block. Other bathers watch with barely concealed amusement, recognizing the telltale signs of a frigidarium virgin, the hesitation, the toe-dipping, the desperate search for a gradual entry point in a pool specifically designed to be uniformly shocking. There is no easy way into the frigidarium. It's like ripping off a bandage if the bandage was made of ice and covered your entire body. The first toe goes in, and immediately your brain starts filing formal complaints. This isn't cold. Cold is a winter morning or a forgotten bath. This is an aggressive assault on every nerve ending you possess. Yet around you, Romans are casually floating like it's a pleasant spring day, discussing poetry and politics while their bodies undergo what should be medically impossible temperature shock. One senator is actually smiling, the madman, as if having his core temperature plummet is the highlight of his day. You take a deep breath, your last as a warm person, and make the plunge. The world explodes into crystalline agony as every muscle in your body simultaneously decides to audition for the role of tightest knot in existence. Your vision goes white, then black, then a concerning shade of purple as your brain tries to process what you've done to it. Somewhere in the distance, you hear laughter, but it might just be your soul leaving your body for warmer climates. The mainstream historical fact nobody prepared you for is that Romans believed this temperature shocking was good for virility. As certain parts of your anatomy retreat so far into your body, they might need a search party to recover. You seriously question Roman medical knowledge. Yet here's Senator Claudius, bragging about his 7 children while bobbing in water that could preserve fish for winter. The correlation seems dubious at best, but you're too busy trying to remember how breathing works to argue. Your body goes through the stages of cold water grief. Denial, this isn't that cold. Anger, who invented this torture. Bargaining, if I get out now, I'll sacrifice a whole cow to any god listening. Depression, I'm going to die here and they'll have to chip my frozen corpse out. And finally, a weird acceptance where you realize you've gone numb and possibly hypothermic, but at least you're not actively dying anymore. This is what Romans call refreshing. The quirky historical detail that makes this even more absurd is that some Romans would repeat the hot-cold cycle multiple times, like thermic masochists bent on shocking their systems into submission. You watch in horror as a regular emerges from the pool, skin the color of a ripe plum, and heads straight back to the caldarium for another round. This is either peak physical conditioning or a cry for help, possibly both. You're one and done, assuming you survive this first attempt. Social interaction in the frigidarium takes on a desperate quality. Conversations are shorter, words clipped as if speaking requires precious warmth better conserved for vital organs. Cold enough for you? Someone asks. The most unnecessary question in the history of human communication. You manage a nod because opening your mouth might let out what little heat you have left. Everyone's movements become economical, precise, like we're all trying to maintain dignity while our bodies revolt against our poor life choices. Historians still debate whether the Romans' love of temperature extremes was about health, philosophy, or just collective madness. Floating here, teeth chattering in a rhythm that could accompany a war drum. You're leaning toward the latter. Yet there's something oddly communal about shared suffering. Everyone in this pool has made the same questionable decision, united in our determination to prove that we're tough enough to handle what is essentially voluntary torture. The pool's design is deceptively simple, just a basin of cold water, but the Romans have managed to make even this a status symbol. The wealthy sections have marble steps and underwater benches, while plebeians make do with rough stone edges that scrape your shins as you scramble out. You're somewhere in the middle, literally and figuratively, clinging to a ledge that's only slightly less hostile than the water itself. Getting out proves to be its own challenge. Your muscles, having gone on strike, refuse to coordinate properly. You haul yourself up like a dying seal, all grace abandoned in favor of simply escaping the aquatic nightmare. Other bathers pretend not to notice your ungainly exit, maintaining the polite fiction that everyone leaves the frigidarium with dignity intact. You stand on shaking legs, water streaming off you, feeling simultaneously proud of surviving and stupid for attempting it in the first place. The immediate aftermath is almost worth it. Almost. Your skin tingles with renewed circulation, Your mind feels sharper, and there's an odd euphoria that comes from not being in freezing water anymore. Romans call this feeling vigor. You call it thank Jupiter that's over. Around you, other survivors stumble about with the dazed expression of people who've seen the other side and aren't quite sure how they feel about it. Your body continues its protests as you try to walk normally. Everything is stiff, uncoordinated, like you're controlling a marionette with frozen strings. You pass a mirror and catch sight of yourself, skin mottled red and white like a poorly painted fresco, hair plastered down, expression somewhere between enlightened and traumatized. This is the Roman ideal of health and beauty. You look like you've wrestled Neptune and lost badly. The Palaestra sprawls before you like an open-air theater of athletic humiliation, where Romans prove their physical prowess while wearing nothing but confidence and olive oil, your skin still tingling from the frigidarium's assault. You stumble into this exercise yard where the only thing more exposed than the architecture is the participants. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly, turning the sandy ground into a reflective oven that makes you nostalgic for the mere discomfort of the tepidarium. Around you, naked Romans engage in activities that would make a Greek gymnasium look modest. Two men wrestle in a sand pit, their bodies so oiled they look like seals trying to establish dominance. Each time they grapple, they slide off each other with comedy that would be hilarious if you weren't acutely aware that you might be next. A trainer barks instructions about proper hold techniques, seemingly oblivious to the fact that holding on to anything when you're both covered in oil is like trying to grab water with a fork. You try to skirt the edge of the yard, hoping to avoid notice, but Roman social rules are clear. If you're in the Palaestra, you participate. A ball comes flying at your head. The Romans play a game called harpastum that's basically rugby without rules or clothing. You dodge, barely, and the ball smacks into a pillar behind you. The players jog over to retrieve it, everything bouncing with an enthusiasm that makes you yearn for the invention of supportive garments that won't exist for another millennium. The mainstream historical fact that nobody mentions in your classical education is that Romans exercised naked not just for practical reasons, but because they believed clothing restricted the body's natural movements. Watching a portly merchant attempt jumping jacks, you seriously question whether unrestricted movement is always desirable. Parts of him move in directions that seem to violate basic physics, creating a hypnotic horror show that you can't quite look away from. A trainer approaches you with the determined stride of someone who's made it their life's mission to improve other people's physical fitness, whether they want it or not. He's built like a statue of Hercules, if Hercules had been fed nothing but protein and disapproval. Before you can protest, he's assessing your physique with the critical eye of a cattle judge, poking at your arms and making disappointed sounds. You need more exercise, he declares, as if this isn't obvious from your desperate attempts to avoid exactly that. The quirky historical detail that makes this worse is that Roman trainers believed in exercising every part of the body, including some you didn't know needed exercise. He demonstrates a series of movements that involve swinging weighted objects while squatting, creating a full-body workout that also serves as a comprehensive display of anatomy. You attempt to replicate the motion and nearly concuss yourself with a lead weight, which the trainer counts as progress since at least you're moving. Wrestling seems like the safest option until you realize it's only safe in comparison to the other choices. Your opponent is a cheerful baker who outweighs you by at least 50 pounds, most of it distributed in ways that defy conventional physics. He slathers on extra oil with the enthusiasm of someone preparing for a festive meal, which in a way, he is. You're about to be the main course in a wrestling match you've already lost. The match begins and immediately devolves into a slippery catastrophe. You grab for his arm, your hand slides off like it's covered in butter. He tries to pin you, you squirt out from under him like a bar of soap in a bath. Spectators gather, offering helpful advice like, grab him, and don't let him grab you. Strategic insights that would be more useful if either of you could maintain contact for more than a second. The sand sticks to your oiled skin, turning you both into breaded human cutlets. Historians still debate whether Roman wrestling had actual rules or if it was just organized slipping. From your current position, somehow both on top of and underneath your opponent simultaneously, you suspect the latter. The referee, if that's what he is, occasionally shouts things in Latin that might be instructions or might just be commentary on your technique. Either way, you're too busy trying not to get sand in uncomfortable places to pay attention. The ball game proves even worse. Harpastum requires running, catching, and throwing, all while naked and increasingly aware of physics' cruel effects on the human body. You join a team purely because standing still makes you a target for recruitment to worse activities. The game seems to involve passing the ball to teammates while the other team tries to tackle you, though tackle is a generous term for what amounts to full-body collision between oiled, naked men. Your first catch is also your last, as three opponents converge on you with the determination of starving wolves. The impact sends you flying. The ball goes somewhere, possibly orbit, and you land in a tangle of limbs that belongs in a cautionary fresco about the dangers of sport. Sand fills every crevice of your body. Oil makes extraction impossible, and somewhere in the pile, someone's elbow finds your solar plexus with unerring accuracy. The exercise yard has its own hierarchy of humiliation. Elite athletes perform feats of strength and agility that would be impressive clothed and become surreal when naked. One young man does backflips across the yard, each landing precise, despite the additional challenge of maintaining dignity mid-rotation. Meanwhile, average citizens like yourself struggle with basic activities, creating a spectrum of athletic ability that ranges from Olympic god to please stop before someone gets hurt. Weightlifting presents its own unique challenges when you're nude. The weights are crude, stones with handles, lead bars, objects that look suspiciously like repurposed construction materials. You attempt to lift what seems like a reasonable weight and immediately realize that proper form is harder when you're worried about where things are swinging. The trainer corrects your stance, which somehow makes everything worse, creating new and exciting ways for physics to betray you. By the time you escape the palestra, you're more sand than human, bruised in places you didn't know could bruise, and carrying enough oil to lamp a small temple. You've been wrestled, caught exactly 0 balls, and lifted weights with all the grace of a newborn giraffe. This is Roman fitness culture, where the exercise doesn't kill you, but the embarrassment might. You stumble toward the massage tables, hoping they offer redemption, but knowing, deep down, they probably just offer different forms of torture. The massage tables loom before you, like sacrificial altars dedicated to the god of unnecessary pain. After your humiliation in the palestra, you're hoping for gentle relief, but the masseurs prowling between tables look like they've been recruited from the gladiator rejects, too violent for the arena, but perfect for pummeling paying customers. Your assigned masseur introduces himself as Brutus, because of course he is, and his hands look like they could crush walnuts or, more relevantly, your spine. Brutus gestures to a marble slab that's supposedly a massage table, but looks more like something from a butcher's shop. You climb on, trying to find a comfortable position on stone that was clearly designed by someone who hated the human form. Around you, other patrons are getting worked over by masseurs who seem to believe that if it doesn't hurt, it's not working. The sound of flesh being kneaded fills the air like the world's least appetizing bakery. Relax, Brutus commands, which is like telling someone being mauled by a bear to enjoy the experience. His hands, each the size of a ham hock, begin what he probably considers gentle exploration of your muscles, but feels more like prospecting for ore. He finds a knot in your shoulder and attacks it with the enthusiasm of a zealot, apparently trying to exercise it through pure force. You try not to whimper. You fail. The mainstream historical fact that massage histories conveniently skip is that Roman masseurs often doubled as primitive chiropractors, believing they could cure everything from headaches to moral failings through aggressive manipulation. Brutus demonstrates this by grabbing your leg and bending it in directions that would make a contortionist wince. Something pops, hopefully just air in the joint and not your soul leaving your body, and he nods with satisfaction like he's just fixed something that wasn't broken until he touched it. The oil situation reaches new heights of absurdity as Brutus adds even more to your already slick skin. You're so lubricated at this point, you could probably slide all the way back to your villa without walking. He works the oil in with techniques that seem borrowed from bread making, punching, kneading, occasionally slapping for reasons known only to him and whatever massage deity he worships. Each impact echoes through the chamber like someone's tenderizing meat, which isn't far from the truth. The quirky historical detail that makes this torture session even more special is that wealthy Romans would have scented oils mixed with gold flakes massaged into their skin, believing it would make them literally glow with health. You're getting the plebeian special, olive oil mixed with whatever was on Brutus's hands from his last victim. Client. You meant client. Though watching him work, victim seems more accurate. Around you, the symphony of massage continues. Groans, gasps, and the occasional scream punctuate the rhythmic slapping of hands on flesh. One senator is getting stretched by two masseurs simultaneously, each pulling a limb in opposite directions, like they're trying to make him taller through sheer determination. He's either in ecstasy or agony. His expression suggests he's not sure which. Another patron appears to be asleep, or possibly unconscious. With Brutus's colleagues, either is plausible. The conversation during massage follows predictable patterns. Masseurs dispense wisdom about diet, exercise, and health with the confidence of people who've never studied medicine but have strong opinions anyway. Brutus informs you that your liver feels sluggish, impressive since he's currently working on your calf, and recommends a diet of barley water and sadness. You nod because disagreeing with someone who has their elbow in your kidney seems unwise. Historians still argue whether Roman massage was therapeutic or just socially acceptable violence. As Brutus discovers a tender spot and attacks it like it owes him money, you're firmly in the latter camp. He's moved on to a technique that involves walking on your back, because apparently hands weren't causing enough damage. You lie there, pressed into marble by a man who weighs as much as a small ox, wondering if this is how flatbread feels. The social dynamics of the massage area add another layer of discomfort. You're expected to maintain conversation while someone systematically dismantles your musculature. The man on the next table is discussing import taxes, while his masseur appears to be trying to separate his arm from his shoulder. He continues his economic analysis even as his face contorts in pain, because showing weakness during massage is apparently worse than bankruptcy. Brutus decides your spine needs adjustment, a term that should come with legal warnings. He manipulates your back with a series of moves that would be illegal in wrestling, creating sounds like someone stepping on dry twigs. Each pop is accompanied by his satisfied grunt, as if your skeleton needed rearranging and only he knew the proper configuration. You're fairly certain you're now either taller or shorter, but definitely not the same shape you started. The oil has reached critical mass. You're so slippery that staying on the table requires active effort. Other patrons have given up, sliding off their tables with resigned dignity and pretending it was intentional. One elderly patrician has to be caught by two slaves as he dismounts, having achieved a level of lubrication that defies friction entirely. This is considered a sign of a thorough massage rather than a safety hazard. The massage concludes with what Brutus calls percussion therapy, but feels like being attacked by an enthusiastic drummer. He pounds on your back with cupped hands, creating a rhythm that might be musical if it weren't happening to your kidneys. Other masseurs join in, the chamber filling with the sound of synchronized thumping that would be hypnotic if you weren't one of the drums. This continues until you're not sure if you're relaxed or just beaten into submission. Finally, mercifully, Brutus declares you balanced, though you feel more like you've been through a grain mill. You slide off the table, literally. The oil ensures there's no other way, and stand on unsteady legs. Everything hurts in new and creative ways, but you're expected to thank him and pay for the privilege of this therapeutic beating. You do both, because Roman social contracts are binding even when your actual contracts, your muscles, feel decidedly loosened. You wobble away, leaving an oil slick in your wake, heading for the food vendors and hoping they sell something stronger than watered wine. After Brutus, you've earned it. The thermopolium attached to the bathhouse assaults your senses with the mixed aromas of garum, roasted meats, and whatever mystery stew has been bubbling since the Republic. You approach the food counter in your fully nude glory, clutching coins you've somehow managed to keep track of despite having no pockets, no purse, and no dignity left. The vendor, a woman who's seen everything the bathhouse has to offer, doesn't even blink at your approach. She's immune to nudity the way soldiers become immune to the sight of blood. "What'll it be?" she asks, ladling something brown and chunky from a pot embedded in the counter. You realize with dawning horror that you'll need to somehow juggle hot food, coins, and any remaining shred of modesty while navigating back through the crowded bathhouse. Other naked patrons are managing it with varying degrees of success. One man balances a full plate on his palm while using his other hand for strategic coverage, creating a dance of priorities that would be artistic if it weren't so desperate. The menu, scratched into the wall in barely legible Latin, offers choices that range from questionable to actively threatening. There's the daily stew, which could contain anything from dormice to last week's leftovers. Boiled eggs floating in garum, the fermented fish sauce Romans put on everything like a condiment-based cry for help. Honey cakes that look appealing until you notice the flies treating them like a social club. And wine, always wine, watered down to the point where it's basically grape-flavored disappointment. You point at what seems safest, a piece of bread and some olives, but the vendor has other ideas. "You need protein after exercise," she declares, loading a wooden plate with chunks of something that might be pork, could be beef, was definitely an animal at some point. She splashes garum over it with the enthusiasm of an artist adding final touches to a masterpiece. The smell hits you like a slap from Neptune's fishiest hand. The mainstream historical fact nobody mentions is that Romans ate most of their meals standing up or reclining, but neither position works well when you're nude and holding hot food. You join the awkward cluster of diners trying to eat while maintaining some semblance of coverage. One creative fellow has fashioned a sort of plate loincloth system, holding his food strategically while eating. It's ingenious until he needs to reach for his wine cup and the whole system collapses. The coins present their own challenge. You've been clutching them so tightly they've left impressions in your palm, but now you need to count out the correct amount while the vendor watches with the patience of someone who's seen this struggle 1,000 times. You place them on the counter one by one, hyper aware that bending over to retrieve a dropped coin would create a viewing angle nobody requested. The vendor scoops them up with practiced efficiency, definitely overcharging, but you're too vulnerable to argue. The quirky historical detail that makes this culinary adventure even more special is that bathhouse food vendors were notorious for their creative pricing strategies. Nude customers couldn't exactly storm off in indignation, and everyone knows you're hungrier after exercise. The vendor adds a convenience fee for serving you at the counter rather than making you sit at tables where your bare bottom would meet questionable wood. You pay it because what choice do you have? Your negotiating position is literally and figuratively exposed. Finding a place to eat becomes a strategic operation. The standing area is crowded with naked bodies trying not to bump into each other while managing hot food. The sitting area requires committing your bare skin to benches that have hosted thousands of other bare bottoms, a thought that makes the standing option seem suddenly appealing. You compromise by finding a corner where you can lean against the wall, though the tiles are cold enough to make you yelp. Other diners have developed eating techniques adapted to their nude circumstances. There's the hunch and munch, shoulders curved protectively around the plate while eating as quickly as possible. The rotate and masticate, constantly turning to prevent any one person from getting a full view while you chew. And the speed feed, abandoning all pretense of civilized dining in favor of getting food into your face before anything embarrassing happens. Historians still debate whether communal nude dining was a democratic equalizer or just another form of Roman social torture. Watching a magistrate try to maintain gravitas while olive oil drips down his chin and onto regions better left undescribed. You're leaning toward the latter, yet everyone pretends this is normal, discussing the weather and politics while strategically holding their plates and cups to maximize coverage. The garum-soaked meat proves to be an adventure in itself. It's simultaneously too salty and too fishy, like someone decided the ocean needed to be more aggressive and condensed it into sauce form. Each bite requires mental preparation and physical fortitude. Around you, other diners work through their meals with expressions ranging from stoic acceptance to barely concealed revulsion. One young man gives up entirely, discreetly dropping his portion into a drainage grate when he thinks nobody's looking. A commotion erupts when someone drops their plate, the ceramic shattering and sending food sliding across the floor. In a clothed environment, this would be embarrassing. Here, it's a catastrophe. The dropper has to decide whether to bend down and clean it up, exposing himself to everyone, or pretend it didn't happen and walk away. Stepping carefully around the garum-slicked obstacle course he's created, he chooses dignity over responsibility, leaving the mess for slaves to handle. The wine helps, even watered down to homeopathic levels. You sip carefully, aware that getting drunk while naked in public is a mistake that writes itself into family shame for generations. Others aren't so careful. One merchant is well into his third cup, his voice getting louder and his gestures more expansive with each sip. His friends try to calm him down before he does something that'll require an offering to multiple gods to atone for. You finish your meal through sheer determination rather than enjoyment, the taste of garum lingering like a fishy ghost. The vendor offers dessert, honey cakes that look like they've been used as wrestling mats, but you decline. You've conquered nude dining, added another layer of oil from the food to your already slick skin, and managed not to drop anything on yourself or others. In the context of bathhouse survival, this counts as a major victory. Now you just need to figure out where to put the empty plate while maintaining whatever posture you've adopted for modesty. The struggle, as with everything in the Roman bathhouse, continues. The gossip corner of the bathhouse operates like Rome's unofficial news network. If news networks required nudity and had no fact-checking whatsoever, You've stumbled into this den of whispers and speculation while trying to find a quiet spot to digest your garum soaked nightmare. But quiet doesn't exist here. Instead, you find clusters of naked Romans sharing information with the enthusiasm of people who've discovered state secrets, but the accuracy of drunk augurers reading pigeon entrails. A group of merchants has commandeered the best spot, near enough to the tepidarium for warmth, but far enough to avoid the splashing. They're discussing the latest scandal. Apparently, someone's wife has been seen visiting the Temple of Venus more frequently than proper religious devotion requires. The storyteller, a wine merchant with unfortunate birthmarks that form a map of Sicily on his back, leans in conspiratorially, causing everyone else to lean in too, creating a huddle of naked bodies that looks like the world's most uncomfortable team meeting. You try to edge past, but Roman social dynamics have already trapped you. Eye contact was made, fatal mistake, and now you're part of the circle, whether you want to be or not. The wine merchant includes you with a gesture that sends droplets of sweat flying, baptizing you into the gossip congregation. You must have heard about Claudia and the gladiator, he says, assuming you know which Claudia among Rome's thousands and which gladiator among hundreds. You nod wisely because admitting ignorance would just prolong the interaction. The mainstream historical fact everyone forgets is that Roman gossip networks were more efficient than their roads. Information traveled from the Senate to the slums faster than a chariot race, gaining embellishments at every stop. Here in the Bathhouse, you're watching this process in real time, as each person adds their own details to the Claudia story. By the third retelling, she's gone from visiting a gladiator to financing an entire ludus with her husband's money while conducting affairs with half the fighters. The conversation topics shift with dizzying speed: politics, adultery, business failures, religious scandals. It's like being trapped in a particularly salacious scroll that won't stop unrolling. One senator leans in to share inside information about grain shortages, prefacing it with, "You didn't hear this from me," which in Roman gossip terms means, "Please tell everyone you know immediately." The information is probably false, but that's never stopped Roman rumors from affecting market prices. The quirky historical detail that makes this gossip corner particularly treacherous is that Romans believed sharing secrets while bathing created stronger bonds, something about mutual vulnerability. So everyone's spilling information they definitely shouldn't share, while their vulnerabilities are quite literally on display. A tax collector you've been avoiding successfully corners you to whisper about upcoming rate changes, his breath hot and garum scented in your ear. You learn more about Roman tax law in 30 seconds than you ever wanted to know. Political discussions get heated, which is especially uncomfortable when everyone's already overheated and unclothed. Two men begin arguing about the current and emperor's policies, their voices rising with their tempers. One makes an emphatic gesture that nearly slaps a bystander, who dodges with the reflexes of someone who's navigated many nude political debates. The argument attracts more participants like flies to honey, each adding their opinion while trying to maintain whatever posture they've adopted for modesty. You attempt to extract yourself from a conversation about whether the newest aqueduct is an engineering marvel or a waste of public funds. But Roman conversation rules are strict. You can't just leave. That's rude. You need an excuse. And I'm naked and uncomfortable doesn't count because everyone is. You finally spot salvation in the form of someone calling your name from across the chamber. It's nobody you recognize, but you wave enthusiastically and excuse yourself to join them, walking purposefully toward a random stranger who looks confused but plays along. Historians still debate whether bathhouse gossip was more reliable than official news sources. Having now heard 17 different versions of the same story about a Vestal virgin who may or may not have sneezed during a ceremony, thereby potentially dooming Rome to divine disfavor, you understand why Roman historians had such wildly different accounts of the same events. Each retelling adds layers like a particularly creative parfait of lies. The danger zone of the gossip corner is the character assassination section, where reputations go to die. A group of matrons, when did they arrive, are systematically destroying the social standing of various absent citizens with the efficiency of a siege engine. You overhear snippets about whose business is failing, whose son can't hold wine, whose daughter was seen smiling at an inappropriate suitor. The information is deployed like weapons, each revelation calculated for maximum damage. Religious gossip forms its own subcategory, whispered because you never know when the gods might be listening. Someone claims to have seen an owl fly backwards, terrible omen, while another insists the augurer misread the chicken entrails last week and all recent prophecies are void. A priest of Mars tries to correct the theological errors, but gets shouted down by people who prefer their religion seasoned with scandal. You edge away from this particular discussion because questioning the gods while naked feels like tempting fate more than usual. The gossip corner has its own hierarchy. Information brokers hold court like naked kings, dispensing rumors in exchange for other rumors in a complex economy of secrets. You watch one particularly skilled gossip work the room, collecting whispers like a bee gathering pollen, cross-pollinating scandals between different social groups. He knows exactly how much to reveal to keep people coming back, a skill that would be admirable if it weren't so terrifying. As you finally escape the gossip corner, your head spins with information you never wanted. You know too much about your neighbors' personal lives, their financial situations, their medical problems described in uncomfortably vivid detail. You've learned which merchants water their wine, which senators take bribes, which matrons dye their hair. This knowledge sits heavy, like the garum in your stomach, impossible to digest and difficult to forget. The gossip corner has done its work. You're now part of Rome's informal information network, whether you wanted to be or not. Next time, you'll hide in the latrines. It's quieter there, and the conversation topics can't possibly be worse. The afternoon shift arrives like a tide of chaos, and with it comes the most dreaded bathhouse phenomenon, mixed bathing hours. Some establishments, in a fit of progressive thinking or pure sadism, allow both genders to share the facilities during certain times. The atmosphere shifts palpably as women begin entering what was previously your all-male nudity nightmare. Your discomfort already operating at maximum capacity, somehow finds new heights previously thought impossible by natural philosophers. The first women to enter are the veterans, usually prostitutes, actresses, or those wealthy enough not to care about reputation. They stride in with the confidence of people who've transcended shame, while you and other modest bathers suddenly discover fascinating architectural details on the ceiling that require an immediate and sustained observation. One woman, clearly a regular, greets several men by name, causing them to respond with the fixed smiles of people trying to have a normal conversation while their brains are screaming. You attempt to find refuge in the tepidarium, but it's already becoming a social minefield of unprecedented proportions. The mixing of genders adds layers of complexity to every interaction. That casual nod you'd give to acknowledge someone, now it might be interpreted as interest. Looking away too quickly, that's suspicious. Looking too long? Absolutely not. You develop a 1,000-yard stare that focuses on nothing while seeing everything, a survival skill that should be taught in rhetoric schools. The mainstream historical fact that makes this even more excruciating is that mixed bathing was controversial even among Romans. Conservative citizens saw it as the height of moral decay, while progressives argued it was natural and healthy. You're currently siding with the conservatives, not from moral superiority, but from the pure practical nightmare of navigating conversations when everyone's naked and trying not to notice that everyone's naked. A group of young women enters, giggling in that way that suggests they're here on a dare or have lost a bet. Their chaperone, an elderly woman who's clearly seen too much in her lifetime to care anymore, guides them with the weary air of someone earning their salary the hard way. The young women's arrival causes a ripple effect. Some men suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere, while others develop an intense interest in staying exactly where they are. The social dynamics shift like tectonic plates grinding against each other. The quirky historical detail that nobody mentions is that some bathhouses employed special attendants during mixed bathing hours whose sole job was to prevent incidents. And these guardians of propriety patrol with long sticks, ready to prod anyone whose behavior crosses from awkward to actionable. You watch one such attendant separate a conversation that was getting too friendly, wielding his stick like a shepherd, managing particularly stupid sheep. The message is clear. Look, but don't touch. Talk, but don't linger. Exist, but don't enjoy it too much. Navigation becomes a three-dimensional chess game. You need to move from point A to point B, but the direct route passes too close to a group of women discussing philosophy. The alternate route requires walking past the massage tables where mixed gender treatments are creating sounds that could be misconstrued. You finally opt for a complex path that involves pretending to examine the mosaics on the walls while crab walking sideways, a technique you've observed other modest bathers employing. Conversations during mixed bathing hours achieve new levels of stilted formality. A merchant, tries to discuss grain prices with a female colleague, but his eyes remain locked on a point approximately 3 feet above her head throughout the entire exchange. She seems equally committed to staring at his left ear. They conduct their entire business negotiation talking to empty air above and beside each other, a performance of studied disinterest that would be comical if you weren't doing the exact same thing. The pools become segregated by unspoken agreement. Women cluster in one area, men in another, with a neutral zone in between occupied only by the very old, the very young, or the very drunk. You stick to the male section like a barnacle to a ship's hull, but even there, the dynamics have changed. Conversations are quieter, movements more restrained. Everyone's hyper aware of how they might appear from across the room, leading to a general atmosphere of performed nonchalance that fools nobody. Historians still argue about whether mixed bathing was empowering or exploitative. From your current position, trying to look casual while using a strategically held sponge for coverage, it feels like neither, just deeply, universally uncomfortable for everyone except the exhibitionists. You overhear two women discussing this very topic, debating the philosophical implications of communal nudity while you try not to exist too loudly in their vicinity. The exercise yard during mixed hours becomes a no-go zone. The combination of physical activity and mixed company creates situations that would require therapy if therapy existed. You peek in once and immediately retreat. The wrestling has stopped, replaced by very careful, very separate exercises that involve no contact, no sudden movements, and definitely no jumping. It's like watching people try to exercise while balancing eggs on their heads. A commotion erupts when someone's son, too young to understand the rules, points at a woman and asks loudly why she looks different. The mother's mortification is visible even through the steam as she drags him away, leaving behind a wake of uncomfortable silence. Everyone pretends they didn't hear, but the damage is done. Conversations restart with the forced brightness of people trying to overcome a social catastrophe through sheer will. The food area becomes even more complicated during mixed hours. The vendor now has to manage orders from both genders while maintaining the delicate fiction that this is all perfectly normal. A woman orders wine while a man behind her studies the price list with the intensity of someone decoding enemy battle plans. The vendor serves everyone with the blank expression of someone who's transcended human emotion through repeated exposure to awkwardness. As the mixed bathing hours continue, you develop a new appreciation for single-gender bathing. It's still mortifying, but it's a familiar mortification. This mixed situation adds layers of social complexity that would challenge a senator's diplomatic skills. You find yourself actually looking forward to the evening shift when normalcy, if nude bathing can ever be called normal, returns. Until then, you navigate this social minefield with the care of someone walking through the forum during an earthquake, every step calculated to avoid disaster. The latrines await like Cerberus, guarding the underworld, except instead of 3 heads, it's a row of communal toilet seats that make you question every life choice. You've been holding it for the past hour, hoping to outlast the bathhouse visit, but your bladder has issued an ultimatum. The entrance to the latrine yawns before you, emitting sounds and smells that would make a battlefield surgeon reconsider their profession. Yet nature calls, And when nature calls in ancient Rome, you answer collectively. You enter to find the familiar horror, a long marble bench with holes cut at regular intervals, no dividers, no privacy, just a line of Romans conducting their business while maintaining conversations like they're at a dinner party. The mainstream historical fact nobody prepares you for is that Roman toilets were social spaces. Men sit side by side, discussing everything from politics to philosophy while performing bodily functions that modern humans barely acknowledge exist. It's democracy at its most visceral. The seating arrangement follows social hierarchy even here. The best spots near the windows go to the wealthy, where fresh air occasionally battles the atmosphere. Middle-class citizens occupy the center, while slaves and the poor cluster near the entrance, where every new arrival brings a fresh wave of sensory assault. You scan for an empty spot, preferably one with maximum distance from neighbors, but the latrine is popular. Apparently, post-meal digestive timing aligns across social classes. You claim a seat between a portly merchant and a thin philosopher, both deep in their respective activities. The merchant greets you with a nod and immediately launches into a story about shipping delays, as if you're old friends meeting at the forum rather than strangers sharing a deeply private moment. The philosopher stares ahead, lost in thought or possibly having an existential crisis about the nature of existence while experiencing its most basic functions. The communal sponge stick, the tersorium, sits in a bucket of vinegar water that's supposed to be cleansing but looks like it's cultivating new forms of life. This is the Roman equivalent of toilet paper, shared by everyone, cleaned between uses with an optimism that borders on delusional. You eye it with the suspicion it deserves, mentally calculating whether you can hold out until you get home to your private facilities. Your body suggests otherwise. The quirky historical detail that makes this experience even more special is that wealthy Romans would send slaves ahead to warm the cold marble seats in winter. You're not wealthy enough for a seat-warming slave, so you experience the full shock of cold stone against bare skin. The temperature difference between your overheated body from the caldarium and the cold latrine seat creates a sensation that defies description, but definitely involves involuntary yelping. Conversation flows as freely as other things. The merchant has moved on to discussing his son's education, punctuating key points with sounds that would be mortifying in any other context, but here just blend into the general symphony. Two senators debate tax policy while engaging in what can only be described as competitive, digestive processing. A poet recites verses, claiming the latrine's acoustics enhance his performance. You're not sure if he means his poetry or other performances. The sponge stick situation reaches critical decision time. You watch the cleaning process, a quick dunk in the vinegar bucket that definitely doesn't kill whatever's living on it. Others use it with the casual confidence of people who've survived multiple bathhouse visits. You weigh the options, use the communal sponge, and risk whatever plague it carries, or attempt creative alternatives that might damage your reputation more than the actual latrine visit. Historians still debate whether Romans were incredibly hardy or just resigned to constant low-level poisoning, Watching your neighbor use the sponge stick with enthusiasm before plunking it back in the communal bucket, you lean toward the latter. The vinegar is supposed to be antibacterial, but it smells like it's fermented into something that could strip paint or dignity. Definitely dignity. The latrine has its own entertainment. A musician plays a flute in the corner, supposedly to mask sounds, but actually just adding surreal soundtrack to an already bizarre experience. Graffiti covers the walls, crude drawings, political slogans, and helpful reviews of various bathhouses facilities. Someone's carved, "Marcus has hemorrhoids," next to a rather unflattering portrait. Marcus, if he's the one sitting 3 seats down, seems unbothered by his fame. The philosopher next to you starts expounding on the nature of humility, using the latrine as a metaphor for how all humans are equal in their basic needs. It's profound in theory, but harder to appreciate when he's demonstrating those basic needs in real time. You nod along because what else can you do? Disagreeing with someone mid-movement seems like poor form, even by latrine standards. A commotion erupts when someone drops their sponge stick into the channel below. The retrieval process involves a slave with a long pole fishing in waters that definitely shouldn't be disturbed. Everyone pretends not to watch while absolutely watching, united in morbid fascination. The stick is recovered, given a perfunctory rinse, and returned to circulation. You make a mental note to never, ever touch that particular bucket. The engineer who designed the water flow system deserves either praise or punishment. A channel runs beneath the seats, carrying waste away with supposedly fresh water. In practice, it creates splashing that turns every visit into a game of chance. You learn to time your movements with the water flow, a skill that should never be necessary, but here represents survival expertise. Finally finished with your business and the required sponge stick ritual, you chose the least diseased looking one and prayed to any god listening. You prepare to leave. But latrine etiquette demands you don't rush. That implies disgust with your benchmate's company. So you sit, participate in another round of conversation about olive oil prices, and pretend this is all perfectly normal, because in Rome, it is. The philosopher quotes Seneca about accepting life's necessities with grace. You quote yourself about never eating garum again. Both philosophies have merit, but yours seems more practical as you finally escape back to the merely uncomfortable nudity of the main bathhouse. At least there, the only thing shared is embarrassment, not sponges. The bathhouse physician's corner lurks like a medical horror show disguised as healthcare, complete with bronze instruments that look more suited for torture than treatment. You've been trying to avoid this area, but a particularly aggressive masseur has left you with what feels like a dislocated everything, and the pain finally overrides your survival instincts. The physician, a Greek named Hippocrates, not the famous one, just someone whose parents had aspirations, examines his latest victim with the bedside manner of someone who learned medicine from veterinarians. "Ah, another case of bathhouse back," he declares, not even looking up from whatever he's mixing in a bowl that smells like fermented death. Around his workspace, other patients wait with expressions ranging from resignation to barely concealed terror. One man clutches his stomach while turning colors that don't exist in nature. Another has something wrong with his foot that you deliberately avoid examining too closely. This is Roman healthcare, public, painful, and performed by someone who might have read a medical scroll once. The physician finally acknowledges your presence, poking at your sore spots with the enthusiasm of a child finding a new toy. Each prod sends lightning through your body, but he nods approvingly, as if pain is the goal. Your humors are imbalanced, he announces, because in Roman medicine, the humors are always imbalanced. It's like horoscopes, but with more bleeding. He prescribes his universal treatment, bloodletting, purging, and something involving a live chicken that you're pretty sure isn't actually medical. The mainstream historical fact that medical texts skip is that Roman bathhouse physicians often doubled as barbers, dentists, and general practitioners of whatever made money. Hippocrates demonstrates this by pausing your examination to extract someone's tooth with pliers that have definitely been used for non-medical purposes. The extraction is swift, brutal, and accompanied by sounds that will haunt your dreams. He tosses the tooth into a bucket with others, a calcium graveyard of bathhouse dental work. Your treatment begins with cupping, because nothing says healing like having heated cups suctioned to your back until you look like you've been attacked by an octopus. Hippocrates applies them with practiced efficiency, creating a pattern of circular bruises that'll last weeks. Other patients sport similar marks, badges of medical honor, or stupidity depending on perspective. The suction is supposed to draw out bad humors, but mostly it draws out regret for seeking treatment. The quirky historical detail that makes this medical circus even more special is that Roman physicians had no licensing requirements. Anyone could declare themselves a doctor, and many did, especially in bathhouses where naked people were already vulnerable and making poor decisions. Hippocrates at least seems to have some training, evidenced by his ability to name body parts in both Greek and Latin while misdiagnosing what's wrong with them. Bloodletting comes next, because Roman medicine operated on the principle that if something's wrong, you probably have too much blood. Hippocrates produces a terrifyingly sharp blade and a bowl, approaching with the casual confidence of someone who's definitely never accidentally hit an artery. You watch your blood drain into the bowl while he explains how this will rebalance your hot and cold humors. You feel lightheaded, but he assures you that's just the treatment working, not incipient shock. Around you, other treatments proceed with similar medical logic. A woman with headaches is having her head wrapped in strips of cloth soaked in something that makes everyone's eyes water. A merchant with gout is being prescribed a diet of only white foods because the physician believes color affects inflammation. A young athlete with a pulled muscle is being treated with what appears to be aggressive poetry recitation, the physician claiming rhythm helps healing. Roman medicine, where science goes to die. Historians still argue whether Roman medical treatments helped despite themselves or succeeded through pure placebo effect. Watching Hippocrates prepare a poultice that contains ingredients ranging from probably medicinal to definitely just dirt. You suspect survival rates had more to do with human resilience than actual healing. He slathers the mixture on your back with the confidence of someone who's never been sued for malpractice because the concept doesn't exist yet. The physician's assistant, a boy who looks too young to be handling sharp instruments, but does anyway, brings over the live chicken. You'd hoped this was a joke, but no, the chicken is part of the treatment. Hippocrates explains that placing a live chicken on afflicted areas draws out evil spirits and pestilence. The chicken, understandably, objects to being medical equipment and expresses its displeasure loudly and with impressive aim. You're now covered in mysterious poultice and chicken droppings, a combination that surely violates some natural law. The bleeding continues until you're genuinely concerned about remaining conscious. Hippocrates declares it perfect timing. Apparently, fainting means the treatment is complete. He prescribes a follow-up regime involving dietary restrictions that eliminate everything except bread and water, exercise that sounds physically impossible, and returning next week for more bloodletting. The bill, scratched on a wax tablet, costs more than your monthly food budget. Roman healthcare, where bankruptcy and blood loss go hand in hand. Other patients share their treatment experiences while waiting, creating a support group of medical survivors. One man has been coming for months for a condition that seems to get worse with each treatment, but he's convinced it's working because the physician told him so. Another whispers that he only comes for the opium-laced wine they prescribe for everything. A third is here because his wife insists, and marital harmony is worth occasional bloodletting. The chicken incident escalates when it escapes, running through the treatment area while Hippocrates and his assistant give chase. Patients scatter, some still attached to various medical apparatus, creating a scene that would be comedic if it weren't happening in a medical context. The chicken finally corners itself near the surgical tools, which seems appropriate given the general threat level of Roman medicine. As your treatment concludes, you're handed a small bottle of something Hippocrates calls universal tonic. It smells like fermented fish mixed with herbs and disappointment. The directions are to take it 3 times daily or whenever you feel the humors acting up. You suspect it's mostly wine with some herbs thrown in for authenticity, but you paid for it, so you'll probably drink it. That's Roman medicine's greatest achievement, making patients complicit in their own questionable treatment. You stumble away, lighter in blood and coin, wondering if the original pain was actually better than the cure. Next time, you'll just suffer in silence like a proper stoic. At least philosophy doesn't require chickens. The closing bell rings through the bathhouse like a death knell, signaling the mad scramble that makes the opening rush look organized. You're still sticky with various oils, treatments, and substances you'd rather not identify, and now you must navigate back to the apoditarium to reclaim your clothes, assuming they're still there and haven't started a new life without you. The crowd surges toward the changing room with the desperate energy of people who've suddenly remembered they have dignified lives outside these walls. The journey back is treacherous. The floors, slick with the day's accumulated oils, sweat, and gods know what else, have become a skating rink designed by someone who hates ankles. You watch a senator ahead of you execute a graceful slide that ends with him grabbing a pillar for support, his dignity shattering like dropped pottery. Others have learned to shuffle walk, creating traffic jams of cautious bathers inching toward their clothes like a parade of newborn colts. You reach the apoditarium to find chaos. The orderly system of the morning has devolved into every Roman for himself. Men frantically search for their belongings, waving wooden tokens at harried attendants who look like they're considering career changes. Someone shouts that their toga is missing, the expensive one with the purple stripe, and accusations fly. The capsarius you tipped earlier catches your eye and points to your cubby with a grin that says, "You're welcome for not selling your clothes." The token system, so clever in theory, proves problematic when half the bathers have lost theirs in the pools. One man insists the dolphin token is his, but three others claim the same dolphin. The attendant suggests they work it out themselves, which leads to a negotiation that would make Senate debates look peaceful. Someone proposes they share the clothes, which opens a whole new realm of logistical nightmares. You clutch your rooster token like a talisman. Your clothes are there, miracle of miracles, but they're not as you left them. Someone has definitely rifled through them, and your belt is mysteriously relocated to a different fold. You conduct a quick inventory. Tunic, check. Sandals, check. Dignity, permanently missing. Around you, others make similar discoveries. One man finds his clothes, but they're damp, as if someone tried them on with wet hands. Another discovers his toga has been improved with creative stains that weren't there before. The quirky historical detail that makes this exodus even more chaotic is that Romans often brought multiple slaves specifically for the dressing process, creating traffic jams of epic proportions. You watch one patrician being dressed by three slaves simultaneously, each handling different garments, like a Formula One pit crew if Formula One involved togas. They crash into other dressing groups, creating a domino effect of partially dressed Romans stumbling into each other. The race to dress becomes competitive. No one wants to be the last naked person in the bathhouse. That's like being the last one picked for teams, but infinitely more humiliating. You struggle into your tunic, still slippery with oil that no amount of striggling could completely remove. The fabric sticks in all the wrong places, bunching and twisting like it's fighting back. Your neighbor has given up on proper dressing and just was wrapped his toga around himself like a particularly inept burrito. Puddles have formed everywhere from the day's activities, creating an obstacle course between you and the exit. Each step is calculated. Avoid the oil slick near the massage tables. Sidestep the suspicious puddle by the latrines. Leap over the garum spill from someone's dropped food. One poor soul slips and takes down two others in his fall, creating a pile of tangled limbs and togas that would be artistic if it weren't so pathetic. Historians still debate whether the closing time chaos was intentional social leveling or just poor planning. Watching a magistrate hop on one foot, trying to put on a sandal, while his slaves are trapped behind a wall of other people's slaves. You see the democratic beauty of it. Everyone's equally ridiculous when they're trying to dress quickly on slippery floors while still damp and oily. The bottleneck at the exit reaches critical mass. Everyone wants out, but the doorway only fits so many people, especially when they're dragging slaves, belongings, and whatever dignity they've salvaged. Someone suggests forming a queue, a radical concept that's immediately rejected as un-Roman. Instead, it's pure pressure dynamics. Whoever pushes hardest exits first. You're swept along in the current of bodies, your feet barely touching the ground. Theft reaches its peak in these final moments. With everyone distracted by dressing and escaping, the professional thieves work their trade with impressive efficiency. You see one snatch a purse from a belt while the owner struggles with his sandals. Another switches high-quality sandals for cheap ones while their victim argues about tokens. The bathhouse attendants watch with the detached interest of people whose shift is almost over and who stopped caring around the third hour. The final indignity comes at the actual exit, where everyone must pass through a narrow doorway while attendants check for stolen bathhouse property. Not clothes, those thefts are considered part of the experience, but actual bathhouse items like strigils, oil flasks, or in one memorable case, an entire bucket. The man with the bucket insists he brought it from home, leading to a philosophical debate about bucket ownership that threatens to block the exit entirely. You finally burst through the doors into the evening air, gasping like you've surfaced from the Tiber. Your clothes sit wrong. Your hair is plastered with oil and sweat. You're missing at least one small item you brought, and you smell like a combination of gym, kitchen, and medical experiment gone wrong. But you survived. You navigated the social minefield of Roman bathing, experienced every possible form of public embarrassment, and lived to tell the tale. Around you, other survivors stumble into the street with similar expressions of shell-shocked relief. Some immediately head for the wine shops, needing to process the trauma with alcohol. Others hurry home, eager to bathe properly in private, the irony not lost on anyone. You take one last look at the bathhouse entrance, where the next shift of victims is already arriving for the evening session. You offer them a silent prayer to whatever god handles public nudity and oil-related injuries. They'll need it. Everyone does in the great democratic embarrassment that is the Roman bathhouse experience. The Roman twilight embraces you like a cool, merciful balm after the steam-soaked nightmare you've endured. You stumble down the street, your toga sitting at an angle that would make a geometry teacher weep, oil still seeping through the fabric in patches that catch the dying light. Other bathhouse survivors scatter in different directions, each carrying their own invisible wounds from the day's social combat. You're different now, changed by what you've witnessed, what you've endured, what you've accidentally seen and can never unsee. The familiar sights of your neighborhood seem surreal after the bathhouse's alternate reality. A bread vendor calls out his evening sales, and you flinch, remembering the food counter where you juggled hot garum-soaked mystery meat while naked. Children run past playing at gladiators, and you think of the tepidarium conversations about the games, conducted by men whose own physical combat involved desperately maintaining towel coverage. Even the public fountain, where women gather to gossip, reminds you of the gossip corner, though at least here everyone's clothed. You pass the temple of Minerva and seriously consider stopping to make an offering. Surely there's a minor deity who specializes in surviving social humiliation. Perhaps Avarunkus, the god of averting calamity, though you're about 6 hours too late for preventive measures. The priest outside eyes your disheveled state with knowing sympathy. He's seen the post bathhouse stumble before. You drop a small coin in the offering box, a thank you to whichever immortal guided you through the ordeal with most of your sanity intact. The mainstream historical fact that strikes you now, in the safety of distance, is that Romans did this daily, every single day. Citizens subjected themselves to this elaborate ritual of public nudity, dubious hygiene, and social navigation that would make diplomatic negotiations look simple. You've survived once, but the thought of returning tomorrow makes you understand why some Romans became hermits. They weren't seeking spiritual enlightenment, they were bathhouse refugees. Your villa appears in the distance like a promise of sanctuary. Your slaves will have prepared a private bath, small and modest compared to the public facilities, but blessed with the luxury of solitude. No gossiping merchants, no aggressive masseurs, no communal sponges that have seen more action than a centurion's sword. Just you, warm water, and the ability to bathe without performing a complex social dance while nude. The streets grow quieter as you walk, the day's commercial chaos settling into evening calm. Shop owners shutter their stores, mothers call children inside, and the city prepares for night. You catch glimpses of other bathhouse veterans making their way home. You recognize them by their particular gait, a combination of oil-induced slip-sliding and the careful walk of someone whose muscles have been professionally abused. There's a silent kinship among you, survivors of Rome's most socially acceptable torture. You reflect on the lessons learned, each one branded into your memory like the cupping marks still throbbing on your back. The importance of token security, the strategic value of corner positions in any bathhouse room, the social mathematics of determining exactly how much eye contact is appropriate when everyone's naked. Answer, none, but somehow still too much. The unexpected athleticism required to maintain modesty while navigating wet marble. These are skills no rhetor teaches, but they're essential for Roman survival. The quirky detail that makes you smile despite everything is how thoroughly democratic the bathhouse experience was. Senator and slave, merchant and laborer, all reduced to the same vulnerable humanity. You've seen magistrates slip on oil slicks, watched wealthy patricians fight over towels, observed philosophers lose their composure in the face of communal sponges. The bathhouse strips away more than clothes. It removes pretense, revealing the awkward, fumbling human beneath every toga. A familiar face passes, Marcus the wool merchant, fellow survivor of today's bathhouse campaign. You exchange the weary nod of veterans who've seen too much. No words are necessary. The slight widening of eyes, the subtle shake of heads communicates volumes. Tomorrow you'll both be back, submitting to the same ritual, because that's what Romans do. But tonight, you're free, walking clothed through streets where no one's discussing philosophy while uncomfortably nude. Your body continues its protests as you walk. Muscles you didn't know existed ache from the palestra's exercises. Your skin feels simultaneously over-scrubbed and still somehow oily. The cupping bruises throb in rhythm with your heartbeat. Your digestive system is staging a revolt against the garum-soaked food. You're a walking advertisement for why private bathing is worth any price, a testament to survival against odds that would make gladiators request desk jobs. The evening air carries the smells of cooking food from various homes, and your stomach clenches in remembered horror. You'll never look at garum the same way. Fish sauce has joined the list of things forever associated with trauma, along with communal sponges, surprise nudity, and the phrase, "let me adjust your spine." Your slaves will wonder why you've suddenly developed such specific dietary restrictions, but some experiences don't translate into words. Home arrives at last, solid wooden doors that promise privacy and dignity. You push through them like a hero returning from war, which isn't entirely inaccurate. Your slaves rush forward, taking in your disheveled state with practiced calm. They've prepared your private bath as requested, heated to the perfect temperature that doesn't require emergency medical attention. Clean towels wait, personal towels that have never seen another person's anatomy. It's luxury beyond measure. As you sink into your private bath, muscles finally unclenching, you offer a final prayer of gratitude. You've survived the Roman bathhouse experience, navigated its social labyrinth, endured its physical trials, and emerged with stories no one will believe. Tomorrow, inevitably, you'll return, because avoiding the bathhouse would be social suicide worse than any embarrassment within its walls. But tonight, in the peace of solitary bathing, you're just another Roman who's learned the hard way that civilization comes at a price, and that price is paid in dignity, comfort, and occasionally communal sponges. The water laps gently around you, warm and welcoming and entirely yours. No stranger's sweat seasons this bath. No unexpected philosophy disturbs the quiet. No one's judging your strigil technique or offering unwanted medical advice. It's just you, warm water, and the blessed silence of privacy. Your eyes grow heavy as the day's tensions finally release. In your dreams tonight, you'll probably still be navigating marble halls filled with steam and social anxiety. But for now, in this moment, you're safe, you're clean, you're alone, and that, after a day in the Roman bathhouse, is the greatest luxury the empire can offer. The warm water works its magic, drawing out the last of the day's tensions from your battered muscles. Your eyelids grow heavier with each passing moment, the gentle lap of water against stone creating a rhythm that pulls you toward sleep. Tomorrow's bathhouse visit seems impossibly far away, a future problem for a future you who's hopefully recovered some dignity and courage. Your breathing slows, matching the peaceful rhythm of the water. The oil finally stops seeping from your pores. The cupping marks fade from sharp pain to dull memory, and even the phantom smell of garum begins to dissipate. In this quiet moment, you're not a Roman citizen who must navigate social complexities while nude. You're simply human, seeking comfort in warm water and solitude. The sounds of the city fade to a distant murmur. Somewhere, other Romans are preparing for sleep, each carrying their own bathhouse stories. But those are their tales to tell. Yours is ending here, in the safety of home, surrounded by water that asks nothing of you except to relax. Your last conscious thought is a prayer of thanks, to the gods who saw you through, to the attendants who didn't steal everything, to your own fortitude for surviving what historians will somehow paint as the height of civilization. Then sleep claims you, deep and dreamless, the kind of rest that only comes after surviving an ordeal. Tomorrow, the bathhouse awaits again. But tonight, you've earned your peace. Rest well, weary Roman. You've survived another day in the Empire's most challenging social arena, and that, perhaps, is victory enough.